This is House Planning Help episode 107. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you want to self-build or renovate. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, my guest is Jon Broome from Jon Broome Architects. We're going to be looking at what it takes to create sustainable neighbourhoods. And at the beginning of a podcast, if I was going to give you a tip here, you start with something of value and not what I'm about to do right now, which is I quite like to tell you where I am in the process in the hope that it will help you. Yet today, I'm just feeling frustrated. I'm feeling like nothing's moving forwards. I don't know whether I'm doing something wrong in my search for land because it's tricky and I set myself goals. You've probably heard a few of them if you've been listening to the podcast. And this just seems to be going behind time. And it gets to the point where you think, this is hard work. This is really, really difficult. So I'm almost wondering whether we can turn this into a blog post, particularly if you're someone who's worked through one of these points and you know exactly what I'm talking about now. And perhaps it was a low point of your self-build project. Well, maybe you can get in touch. We'll put a link into the show notes for this. And I'd love to write a blog post with perhaps a few of you, people who have been through this, who know exactly what I'm talking about now. It might be at the very beginning of the project. Maybe it's a financial thing. Maybe it's halfway through and there's some issue on site that's just proving really difficult or you have to stop work altogether. But I would love to encourage others that you can get through this because I'm sure you can. Maybe I'm just having a bad day today. And it's lucky actually that we've got a really good interview coming up. Jon Broome is someone that I've met a number of times. He's always a really interesting guy to chat to, loads of experience as you're about to find out. And actually here in the UK, going right back to the roots of Walter Seagull, all that sort of thing. As I say, he's going to do this in his introduction because I started by asking him to share some of this story and where his passion lies.
I started getting involved in people building their own houses back in the 70s with Walter Seagull, who some people may know as a designer who pioneered the idea of lightweight timber construction for self-building. And we worked together in Lewisham on a couple of schemes in the 70s and 80s, which were very successful. And following on from that, I continued to work with groups in South London and elsewhere, building housing co-ops, using that kind of technique. Over the years, the interest in, I suppose, what you might think of as group self-build and social community-based self-build has waned. Housing associations found it quite difficult to cope with. It's quite resource-intensive and it takes time. But nevertheless, I think over the years, I've seen a lot of people get an awful lot of benefit out of working in this way, designing and building for themselves. And more recently, obviously, there's been quite an upsurge in interest in the idea of custom build, and so we've started working again in that field. And we did a design and fit out scheme for a housing association in Walthamstow recently, and a number of individual houses for kind of grand designs type clients who are wanting big, low energy, passive house, family houses. And more recently, working on a community land trust development in Lewisham, which we've now secured a site for, we think around 30 or more houses and flats for people, who wouldn't otherwise be able to get into decent housing in the city in London.
There's quite a lot I could dig into there. I think I must ask a question, at least a couple of questions on Walter Seagull, because he's got a bit of a reputation, and I know that whenever he's mentioned, you seem to pop up in the background. So why was he so significant, and what was it like working with him?
What Walter did was reinvent building construction from first principles to make it very simple and economic to build. And that technology, if you like, very simple as it is, opened up possibilities for people to design for themselves and to build for themselves from start to finish. And so very economical buildings. And that opened up a whole range of possibilities, which I think are yet to be realised fully, actually.
I was going to ask you how that has developed, because obviously this was some time ago now. So is it something that's waned before it's maybe gathering pace again?
I should think there must be 200 or 300 houses inspired by Walter's work built in the UK. But from the mid-90s, I'm guessing, there hasn't been an awful lot of interest continuing in what he achieved. Partly, I think, because people's preoccupations in housing have moved on. There's always something new on the horizon policy-wise, so it's value for money or prefabricated building, or currently, custom building has become quite of interest. And so I think there was a bit of a period when people were preoccupied with other things, really.
We're going to be talking about creating sustainable neighbourhoods today. Should we start with why this is something you're particularly interested in?
I mean, I'm concerned about the possibility of good buildings which perform well, low energy, sustainable, comfortable, light, airy, well ventilated, all those kinds of things. We can do all that. What I think in the UK we find much more difficult is creating neighbourhoods which are convivial and support comfortable social living arrangements and so on. And so the question is, what are the ingredients of such a sustainable neighbourhood, and what would make it different from what the kind of standard developer housing estate or council housing estate? And I think one of the key things behind it is this idea of residents having control over the major decisions that affect how places are and how much they cost to live in and how they're built and designed and so on. And it's my belief that whilst the private sector delivers what a lot of people want and can afford, and whilst the public sector can deliver us a limited number at the moment of affordable homes for people who don't have a great deal of money, there is a big area in between where what's on offer doesn't satisfy what people want necessarily. It's not of a price that they can afford. It doesn't offer very decent places to live necessarily, bit mean, bit small, not very energy efficient, not terribly well built. And so it's bringing good building together with people. It's to do with low energy building. It's to do with sustainable development. It's to do with, just living in a convivial way in the city, which, normal housing arrangements don't encourage, I don't think.
How do we get started? Because as self-builders, a lot of us will just be doing this on our own. We might want to be part of a sustainable neighbourhood, but I'm assuming you have to start with that from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing in Lewisham is organised as a community land trust, which holds property in trust, as its name suggests, for the benefit of the community. And so, anybody can join a group of that kind. There's a nominal membership. It's run by a board, which are elected. So it's a democratic, open organisation. And we're working with a number of different arrangements financially to give a spread of affordability. So at the bottom end of the range, there will be places you can rent for the sort of money that you would expect to pay for a council house, for instance. There'll be shared ownership and shared equity dwellings where you can buy in at 25% of the ownership of the building, rising up to 80%. The Community Land Trust retains some of the equity to ensure that the overall development remains affordable in perpetuity, so that the dwellings can't migrate into the private sector, the private market, at which there are no limits.
And this is how it gets out of control, is it? It becomes something that's not very affordable.
Which is what happened with the original Lewisham self-build schemes, which were built as shared ownership developments, which now change hands for, £500,000 or something.
If we had land, I know it's a big if, is self-building still something that's actually quite cost-effective if we get stuck in?
For sure. I mean, I think you could save nearly half the cost of a dwelling, I think. And it's significant. And so in the Lewisham example that we're looking at the moment, we're encouraging a high degree of self-build because we feel a number of advantages follow from that. It reduces costs significantly, but also people in my experience, have got a huge amount of self-confidence really out of building and designing and achieving something, which they're proud of. And I think the social benefits of that are enormous and currently underestimated, not understood really by a lot of people, I think.
We had Michaela Benson on the podcast recently, who is a sociologist, and I was interested that one of the things she said is, on the whole, self-builders tend to be getting towards retirement and have worked their way up the housing tree so that they start with something small and perhaps do a little addition at the back and then get to that stage that they can build or are prepared to tackle a whole house. So is that your experience, or could you come to this quite fresh and be part of this scheme, for example?
Self-build covers a very wide range of experience and possibilities, I think. One of which is, as you say, people, acquiring access to wealth through equity in housing and reinvesting it. It's not the only way. And I think our members of the Community Land Trust, on the whole, are young singles and couples. And they're people who are struggling to find places which they can buy or rent for their income within London. So there's a very high proportion, actually, of young people.
Are they trading time? Is that one of the factors? I know that this Lewisham scheme, for example, you're saying that the leader of this project has spent about 3 years so far pushing it through. And I imagine that must also be one of the reasons why developers perhaps don't want if they've got a product they just want to shift on and sell, they don't really want this involvement because it does take a bit of extra time.
It can do. I mean, I think, the current interest in custom build it can be beneficial to developers too, because it means that they can reduce their risk by selling service plots, for instance. They'll get their return on the land very quickly. So, it can have benefits for developers. It can certainly have benefits for self-builders, reducing costs. It's never going to be the solution to the housing problem, which I think some policymakers rather hope it will be.
What are the issues then? What are the key issues if we put them on the table now?
It does take time, but I think the benefits are long-lasting in terms of quality, of construction, design, maintenance, all these things. Satisfaction generally is much higher, I think. But these are not the things which are prioritised by developers and policymakers, really.
So why do their houses sell, in your opinion? Because I often think, we probably said at the beginning of this, that people are just buying it because they can't get anything else and it's too complicated to go down the self-build route.
I'm sure there is a hidden demand for something other than the market generally offers. But a lot of people, can't. I mean, it suits them fine. They don't want to get involved in complicated, time-consuming effort. If they can buy something, that's fine by them. But it's not everybody who wants to do that. And it's very simple in my mind. It's just what's missing are the opportunities to design and build for yourself.
Talking about sustainable neighbourhoods, I know that you've been abroad, so what has been the purpose of going to other countries and just having a peek at how they do things?
On the continent, the culture of people being involved in self-providing housing remains strong. And so in Germany, a very significant, probably more than half the housing market is of that kind. And so in other cities in Germany, Berlin we were recently, probably something like 10% of the new housing in the city is being produced by groups of people getting together, designing and then not necessarily building, but commissioning housing. And that process is aided by the city government, which has a small department which holds regular public meetings for people who may be interested. The financial system encourages it because there are lenders, banks, regional banks, which we don't really have in the UK, have established networks of professionals, architects and others who promote these schemes, and they are willing to lend on schemes which they know are being professionally managed and developed So there's an infrastructure of people promoting this kind of thing. And the availability of land is, I mean, Berlin's a special case to some extent, but the local authorities in Germany have the power to compulsory purchase land, which they then put the infrastructure in and sell at a profit, which gets ploughed back into housing development to groups who then build. And interestingly, the price is set, it's a fixed price, and the competition between people who might want to develop the land is on the quality of the development rather than on the price which they're willing to pay. So it's quite a different way of thinking about, land and what it's worth and how it should be used.
How do they assess what a quality development will be?
The things they're looking for, I think, are to do with value for money and I mean, the number of dwellings, the quality of the dwellings, the groups. I mean, a lot of these groups are serving special needs of one way or another, disabled people, elderly people, things like that. And so, it's about social provision, it's about quality on the whole.
And back here, it's just land is really all about making as much money as possible.
Yes, and that includes public bodies as well, who are required by government to do exactly the same.
Interesting. Okay, so all of this time spent abroad, were there any practical elements you could bring back, or is it really just saying, that's how we'd like it one day maybe, but we just have to deal with how things are at the moment?
No, I think there's a lot to learn, and we can put a lot of that to practice in terms of how groups are organised, how design processes are organised with workshops and design sessions on different elements of the proposals and so on. It requires a different set of skills, I think, that architects and developers don't generally have, about listening to people, about communicating effectively, about controlling costs effectively, because self-builders are very at risk of budgets going out of control and so on. So these are all important lessons, I think, which we'll be putting into practice in these developments.
In the case of Lewisham, you are the architects. Can you explain how you're enabling this? What are you doing in this process?
Well, so far, I mean, we've been working up the idea. So what does affordable housing mean to who? How are you going to measure it? We're aligning the cost of people's housing with their income rather than with the value on the open market. And that's the first step. The second step is to make sure that houses are cheap to run, that you're not spending £1,000 or more a year on heating and lighting. You're spending, 100 or 200 quid. We're concentrating on making sure that issues like the sustainability of the development as a whole, so it's car free, we'll have electric shared cars on site, we'll have provision for bicycles and so on. All those kinds of measures, making sure that it's a mixed community. It's not just people without money or people who've got a lot of money. It involves a certain level of cross-subsidy from people downsizing, let's say, getting on, wanting to find a congenial group to live with, in a supportive environment. Bit of money to put in, supporting, young people who are struggling, to rent or buy. Self-build to reduce costs, but also to create opportunities. The local authority is keen to create opportunities for people to acquire skills to improve their employment prospects. They're the kind of basic building blocks that we're working with. The group has developed 10 principles in conversation to guide the vision, if you like, which encompass these ideas of sustainability, affordability, of resident involvement, robust financial model to base it on. And the task now is to translate that into a design brief, into plans for flats and houses, and also a method of construction which is going to be capable of unskilled people constructing on site. and all the necessary kind of contractual and arrangements to make that happen. And that includes sort of legal frameworks for leases and things. It includes financial arrangements for loans and mortgages. It includes all the kind of measures that, building standards, control and so on, planning issues. So there's a lot to do.
You've been through this scenario a number of times. So just talking about what people want in a community and what they want from their home, can you draw any comparisons?
I think what matters more than anything else is having a feeling of being in control of their destiny, knowing how the building is and how and why it's designed the way it is, how it can be changed, developed, improved. That's a great facility, I think, which people enjoy more than anything else. It's just being in touch with your immediate living surroundings.
Because it always used to be like that, didn't it? If you go back hundreds of years, you would have had to do it yourself.
Yeah, of course. I mean, before the Industrial Revolution, really, everybody was building houses for themselves one way or another, for sure. And they were using local available materials, which were necessarily economical to build with. We enjoy much more comfortable places to live now in terms of artificial light and central heating and all these other things. And it's making all that accessible to ordinary people to manipulate, I think, which is the trick. And it's not self-evident how, for instance, modern buildings are ventilated, how you get fresh air, how much, how do you minimise, in the old days you opened a window, but you got a blast of cold air. So it's making modern construction, more available to the man in the street, as it were.
In terms of how sustainable communities will grow, are we always going to have that split of people that just want to buy off the shelf and those that want to be more involved in the process?
I think it's my belief that what matters is getting developments on the ground that you can look at, talk about, demonstrate what it means. And I think this goes for sort of co-housing developments, for instance, of which there are a handful in the UK now, common in Scandinavia and more recently in America, where people have got together in this way. And one thing has led to another, and I think the same thing can happen here, that, people will see the real advantages which lie there. As I said, I don't believe it's for everybody, but I think there's a significant number of people, as in America, who find that this way of living suits them very well.
I've been to a number of co-housing communities, and I do think that it's something that more people would like if they experienced it. It's the same with a passive house, that if you go into one and experience that comfort and air quality, then you'd probably want that as well. It's just how you get over that bit of knowing that is actually something that you desire.
Yeah, and the critical thing is getting stuff on the ground that works. And, I'm very keen about this Lewisham Russ Community Land Trust project, because I think if we can pull it off and demonstrate what the possibilities are in a urban situation, I'm hopeful that a lot of people will recognise that there's something in that.
So how long will this project take to achieve, and what are the steps forward from here?
Well, we've just secured a site, and so, we'll be embarking on a year of developing the designs and so on, and probably something around 2 years to build.
How did you acquire that site?
The site is in the ownership of the council, and so the local authority have assisted the development by making that site available. Now, it hasn't been easy to persuade them. It's taken time, and it's taken a lengthy and expensive tender process, in fact, to secure the site, which I think is unfortunate because a small community group doesn't have resources of money and all the rest of it. What it does have is enthusiasm and determination, and that's won through. And we were fortunate in getting grant aid from the Greater London Authority as well. The local authority is supportive, don't get me wrong, but it's not easy.
has this situation really been an example of them giving you land for cheaper than it would be, or have I got that wrong?
The site has got a lot of difficulties, as do most in London. There's always a good reason why they're not built on, by and large. So, there are costs associated with that. And at the same time, the local authority is mindful of the social benefits arising from getting more affordable homes in the borough. And so that's recognised in the deal for the land. And, this is quite a usual arrangement, really. So it's not what the land would be worth on the open market for a developer to pile flats higher and higher. It recognises that, what we're creating is something different, and that there are costs involved in that in terms of energy standards, sustainability and other things.
Well, maybe this is an episode actually where we should follow up on this when it's all complete. Do you fancy that?
I think it would be good to sort of keep in touch with how it develops, for sure.
Excellent, Jon. Any final thoughts then? We'll come full circle back round to where we started. We talked about residents having control. Clearly affordability has come up a few times, but creating sustainable neighbourhoods, is there any other key factor that we need to mention in this first part?
Well, I think it is a case of people having a vision of some way of improving the circumstance in housing and having the determination to follow it through. I mean, there have been other groups that have done exactly this. In Bristol, the Ashley Vale development there is a very good example. And again, they had help from the local authority through the planning system there. But, they pushed it through, and I think it is a very good example of this kind of thing.
Jon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can review today's conversation by heading to our show notes at houseplanninghelp.com/107 for this episode. What we do is we put all the key information, we add photos that are relevant, we've got a picture of the plot that we talked about in Lewisham, we've got links to Jon, you can ask a question or leave a comment at the bottom of the show notes as well. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/107. Finally, a quick update on the hub, because this is all shiny and new, and if you're just getting your head around what is it exactly, well, I'll try and tell you and explain a bit more. So the idea being that at Regen Media, we produce a lot of video. We see that as an advantage here in the hub, because you might read a book on building a house or try and listen to a podcast like this. But there's a lot that we can't do in the podcast. You can write it up in a blog, I suppose, and show some pictures. However, video is quite effective in communicating a message, and that's what we're going to try and do more and more of. So each month we are returning to Longbarrow Passive House. We've been there for probably about 10 or 11 months now, filming, and in delay we're relaying some of those chapters. Each month we're releasing a different episode, so that's a video, and also we've done a write-up according to where we are in the process, just analysing some of the decisions that have been made. Then there's the other side. We add a new unit, which is collating some of what we've learnt, speaking to more experts and trying to move on in a bit more detail. We've decided we have to pick somewhere to begin with, which is the UK, and also for those who want to build a house brand new, not a retrofit or anything like that. Over time, we hope to expand that. Very targeted to begin with. And also there's the networking side, that you can chat to other people who are building a house, perhaps help them. I don't know. I think that's what's very valuable about these online communities, is just getting in there, getting in the forums, asking your questions. We'll try and pick up on some of those and see if we can answer them directly as well, with the help of other people who've been there and done it, or experts that we have at our fingertips. So that's the idea. It's £45 for the whole year at the moment. That price will definitely go up. For now, we're keeping it like that until we feel the time is right. So sign up now, houseplanninghelp.com/hub. We'll tell you all about it, give you more details, and make you realise this is a no-brainer decision. Thank you so much for being there. Let me tell you about next week. We're chatting to Kirsty Maguire, who is a top architect in Scotland. And what we're looking at, you may be in this situation that you haven't got your plot of land and you're feeling discouraged because it's hard work to get the land to build on. What can you actually do? Because they always say that you can't really do much until you've got the plot of land. Is there anything that you can do? That's what we'll be discussing with Kirsty. She's giving me a helping hand. You'll sort of see how that works through me. And then we'll do that next time. Thank you so much for being there. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media. Content that matters.